We are all operating at the speed of information.
Welcome to Agency for Change, a podcast from KidGlov that brings you the stories of change makers who are actively working to improve our communities. In every episode, we'll meet with people who are making a lasting impact in the places we call home.
Hey everyone, this is Lynn Weinman, president of KidGlov. Welcome to another episode of the Agency for Change podcast. So today we're going to talk about caring for caregivers because caring for aging family members can be a really challenging journey. It's filled with emotional ups and downs, but it's also an opportunity for rare and beautiful connection and growth. So today's guest, Michele Magner, she's an aging enthusiast, I love that title, and a caregiving coach, brings a wealth of experience to the table. She is the founder of Inspired Caring, and she's passionately dedicated to helping caregivers prioritize their own mental and emotional well-being. So whether you're just beginning a caregiving journey or whether you've been in it for a long time, or if you're not in it, but you might be in the future, give this one a listen because her insights are invaluable. Michele, welcome to the podcast.
Lynn, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here today.
Absolutely. Okay. I want to have you start by telling us more about Inspired Caring because I've never talked to anyone who said they were an aging enthusiast and a caregiving coach. Tell me more about what you do at Inspired Caring.
Well, thank you for asking that question. I think aging is one of the most confusing and complicated things that we do as human beings.
That is so true. And it happens. It happens to all of us. It's going to happen to all of us. But yet, are we all in denial?
Yes, the bottom line is yes, we are all in denial. So when I speak, one of the things that I share is my theory is the moment we're told we're no longer allowed to trick or treat because we are too old, that's
Yes.
when we start complaining about getting older. And if you have people, if you just start to have a heightened awareness around this, you will find that people in their 20s and 30s are complaining about getting older.
Yes.
On up.
Yes.
Our life expectancy is 77 years currently. If you make it into your 60s, there's a solid chance you're making it to your 80s. So Lynn, that means we're spending up to 8 decades complaining about something that is inevitable.
Wow, that's it's kind of sad when you say it that way, right? Like, why are we complaining about it? And do you think 57 is too old to trick or treat? I just got to go back to that.
I mean, you and me, sis, we should just suit up and get out there. And I think that people would actually find it delightful at age 52 and you at 57 to let's give it a try.
Let's give it a try. Next year goals. So
yes.
All right.
Well, and because we are living longer than we have lived in the past, and the end of our life tends to have a lot more chronic illness. We are in this new territory of caregiving that we've just never been in before.
Yeah.
So Inspired Caring is really about helping people find the inspiration and the education and the resources that they need to care for the person that they love, but also really care for themselves along the way because we're aging too.
Yeah.
And so it's influencing our aging outcomes.
So talk to me about this, because I see a lot of statistics about loneliness in the senior population and mental and emotional health in the senior population, which is a concern of yours, but you're really taking that to the next level and thinking about the mental and emotional well-being of the caregiver. It's probably a group that's often overlooked.
Well, it's something that we stumble into. It's not like there's a sign-up sheet.
Right. I mean, even with parenting, you have what to expect when you're expecting, and you see the pediatrician, and there's lots of advice available, much less on the aging end of the spectrum, I imagine.
Well, I agree with that. And then if you think about who the caregivers are, over 50% of the time, it is a woman in the family.
Yes.
Sometimes it is a partner or spouse. So
Yes.
they too may have their own chronic illness that they are managing as well. And then if you think to how things used to be back in the day,
Yeah.
we weren't as spread out as we are now
Yeah.
geographically.
Mm-hmm.
So those family caregivers, if it is an adult child, may not even live in the same city as the
So
aging
true.
adult,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That adds another layer of complexity to how do we handle this, and discussion of resources and guilt and responsibility, and gosh, all those things that are not fun to talk about. But
Yeah.
I know, in addition, Michele, to the professional work that you do, you have a personal connection to caregiving. I'd love to hear the story of how caring for your own family really shaped your approach to what you're doing right now.
For me, family caregiving was a true blessing. And I can say that very fully and wholly in
Hmm.
reflection. It had its hard times and hardships for sure, but it
Yeah.
actually began when I was 27.
Wow.
And at age 27, I was engaged. I wasn't even
Yeah.
married yet. No kids yet. And I became the primary caregiver to my grandmother, my
Oh,
paternal
wow.
grandmother.
Yeah.
I was the only family member in town. We all lived in Kansas City at the time. So was with her through really making that decision that it was no longer safe for her to be driving. It was
Hmm.
also no longer appropriate with the level of care she needed to be living at home. So helped
Yeah.
her make that transition into assisted living and then through end of life. And then shortly thereafter, my maternal grandmother, she was also in Kansas City. And so I had the privilege of being on that same journey with her.
Yeah.
So for about 7 to 8 years, I was in this role as primary family caregiver. So just all of those doctor's appointments, hospital stays, everything around the home. Um, I don't like to say it fell on my shoulders because
Yeah.
I happily picked it up, but that's where things started on my personal journey. And then fast forward not too many years later, a couple years later, we ended up moving to Omaha because we could tell something was up with my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And she was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. And so I was part of the family care team,
Yeah.
helping her and looking out for her. And then my father-in-law, who was her primary caregiver, had a terminal cancer diagnosis.
Oh my goodness.
So
Wow.
I know it kind of layered on. So he ended up passing away first. And so then the responsibility for her care really did, as he was, declining in health, it did shift to us. So my husband, his brother, and myself. So it's been a long journey, but it has completely informed the work that I do, my passion for serving seniors and their family members, my curiosity about how we age as individuals and how culturally are we aging
Yeah.
was really peaked. So I've just continued to pursue education in these areas.
Some of the things that you've mentioned, you've hit on some of my greatest fears as a daughter and a granddaughter. The conversations about driving, the conversations about not being able to stay in your home, the conversations about illness and then end of life, right? Like those are four big ones right there. And I'm already just scared of the conversations, not actually even doing the work. I mean, from your perspective, Michele, what are some of the big challenges that these caregivers face as their family members or their loved ones need increased care, and how do you navigate those challenges?
A loaded question,
Yeah,
right?
I know. I think it was three questions in one, so I'm sorry about
Right.
that.
That's okay. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is our aging loved one. I mean, we all have this general denial about getting older.
Right.
And I feel like the older we get, we lose some of that ability to self-assess and determine
Mhm.
how we're doing. Like, how much
Yeah.
help do we need? I recall my father-in-law sitting on the couch struggling to put on his socks, and the curtains were pulled shut and the room is darkish. And I just asked him, how do you think things are going? And he looked at me and then said, great.
And you're like,
Oh, so I think for families who are starting to notice that something is not quite right or not as easy for someone as it
Yeah.
used to be, I think that we have to get into a headspace that it's okay to be a little uncomfortable. Because
Yeah.
what I witness is that families, to avoid having a hard conversation, they are willing to flip flop this guilt resentment coin over and
Yeah.
over again. I feel very strongly that when we delay having important conversations or hard conversations just because we don't want to be uncomfortable, we're also delaying the care or interventions that someone needs that could potentially keep them home for longer.
Yeah.
And, in that moment with my father-in-law, my response, and not because I am, my background with my industry, but because my position within the family, I wasn't one of his sons. I
Hmm.
felt like I was able to say, this feels unsustainable.
Yeah.
And then just pause and let the air get really uncomfortable around
Yeah.
both of
Okay.
us.
There's the next biggest fear, right? Other than having the conversations is that uncomfortable moment. But it's so important, right? Like it's so important to just let it happen.
Right. Because here's the thing is we're going to be uncomfortable at some point, and delaying the discomfort, it stretches everything out. It
Yeah.
doesn't, like,
Yeah.
we can kind of ignore something to a certain degree for a period of time and just back burner it for a little while until the next incident or episode happens. But more than likely, there's always this nagging
Yeah.
that we have in our
Yeah.
soul and heart. So I would say, the first thing is I believe there are 5 phases of caregiving.
Okay.
And so phase 1 is when you're just kind of annoyed and frustrated. Your parent can't quite keep up. Phase 2 is
Right.
usually there's been like an incident or something specific that has occurred. And so we're trying to triage that situation
Hmm.
and fix that current problem. Phase 3 is when we start to notice like things actually do have to shift. Like we are now in this really big transitional phase.
Hmm.
Big decisions are having to be made, hard conversations are being had, and someone is no longer able to manage the business side of their life.
Yeah.
This is maybe when driving starts to come into question. That phase 4, Lynn, is when someone is really bearing the full burden and responsibility in that caregiving role. So they are now really in charge of someone's health care initiatives and
Yeah.
advocacy. They're now in charge of that financial piece,
Mm.
making sure things are being taken care of. And then phase 5 is end of life, which, we don't love talking about end of life, but we know it's going to happen for all of us.
Right.
And so there's this movement towards what does a good death look
Right.
like? And so there's different emotions and things that we can do to be prepared within each of these phases. But I think for people that are finding themselves on this caregiving journey, like you're starting to realize, oh, wait a minute. I'm not just the
Yeah.
spouse anymore. I'm not just the daughter or son anymore.
Yeah.
I think having an awareness about this is really important.
Amazing. I want to go back through that because I think those 5 steps, and I was frantically taking notes on this side of the microphone, but I think those 5 steps are really important. So I wrote it down. Phase 1, you're just starting to get annoyed and notice something different. And that is interesting because it's interesting to me because as your loved one ages, there is something about like they've always been your hero, right?
Mm,
And you want them to have that. And when they start into that decline, I think sometimes there is that sense of grief or loss that does make you annoyed. Why is this happening? And then you said phase 2 usually is represented by some type of incident. Something has happened. Phase 3, okay, you've recognized things need to shift. We can't keep going the way we are.
right.
Phase 4, you've got a caregiver that has the full burden now, that is, making decisions, stepping in, advocating. And then phase 5, end of life, which there are a lot of resources out there to help us make that journey into transition into end of life more beautiful for
Mhm.
everyone involved. So in that journey, what is the best time for someone to engage with someone like you that can help them? Is it way up in phase 1? Is it phase 2? Is it the point where you just feel out of control? What is the engagement strategy there?
I think ideally, someone in phase 1 or 2 are listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
They're tuning into the Inspired Caring podcast.
Yeah.
If someone is realizing things seem to be clicking along, faster, or things are just moving along, and we're starting to have to make some decisions, ideally, people in phase 3, that's when we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
Or they are engaging in my online coursework that has been
Yeah.
created. So once people hit phase 4, at the beginning of phase 4, we kind of go through these little honeymoon phases because there's always these chaotic episodes and moments, and then things plateau and settle down. So even within each of these phases, if you are in chaos, you're
Hmm.
probably talking to a hospital social worker
Yeah.
or a doctor. When things feel like they've settled down a little bit, or really recognize that you need to catch your breath, those are good times for us to be talking as well.
Yeah.
Once we are fully immersed in phase 4, especially towards the end, when someone is just feeling like they are drowning, it's just so much harder at that point to weave through interventions. It's
Yeah.
possible, it's doable, but people get very fixed on how things are and start to lose some hope.
Absolutely.
So, and then in phase 5, that end of life, there's potential that things are settling down a little bit again because reality is setting in. And
Yeah.
so that would be another good time.
Absolutely. So, Michele, you've got the online course, you've got the podcast. Can you talk a little bit more about the resources you have available for folks? And we'll make sure to get links to both in the show notes on the KidGlov website so they can access those.
Fabulous. Yes. So the podcast is a growing body of work of my own thoughts and sentiments from my own caregiving journey. And there are some episodes that were recorded during those chapters of caring
Yeah.
for my in-laws. And then I have had a lot of guests on, expert speakers with national platforms that have generously come on to share their thoughts and the work that they do. So there's a lot of guest episodes, and we tackle things like how do we empty the house? Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
episodes about
Oh
how do we
gosh.
manage the stuff and
Yes.
empty the house with
So
multiple
much
experts.
stuff. Yes.
There's
And
so much
so much
stuff.
emotion, often with many families. My family, so much emotion tied up in this stuff. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, we're very connected to our belongings and what they mean and represent to us. There's also, speaking of emotion, a lot of episodes around, the 5 phases of caregiving. I think there's 3 pillars to caregiving, which are curiosity, communication, and compassion, both for
Nice.
the person that we're caring for and for ourselves. And I think we lose sight of our own, curious about, like, how am I responding to this? Is this what I want? Is this how I want to
Yeah.
be showing up?
Yeah. That is
Communicating.
such a good question. Is this how I want to show up? I think we could ask ourselves that every day, but I think particularly in a situation that that will be stressful and emotional, that is such a great question.
Thank you. I agree. And I think it's something that we're not asking ourselves enough. Like, we just get on autopilot and go, especially when we have tasks that need to be completed. So there's the podcast has a lot of great episodes. The coursework, I've created 3 different courses. One is called Illuminating Senior Living.
Mm,
And it's really, I would advise people are checking that out anywhere in that phase 2 to 4, because by the end of phase 4, we're going to have some serious interventions in place for someone.
yeah.
And we want people to stay home for as long as possible. So part of that course is really around, when is it appropriate and time to move, what to look for, how to choose, explaining
Hmm.
in detail each level of care and the
Hmm.
fluidity within those, the common objections. And you were talking about being uncomfortable and having those hard
Hmm.
conversations. And so the course teaches people about planting the seeds of, again, having that curiosity. This is unsustainable. Where do you see things going in the
Yeah.
next 12 to 18 months?
Right.
So the course teaches people how to have those conversations. And then there's Inspired Gratitude is another course.
I love that.
21 days of prompts to help you get into that headspace and feeling the emotion of gratitude. Again, how do I
Yeah.
want to be showing up? And then Inspired Caring, that course is really focused on our emotional well-being and our mental health. So
Very
how
nice.
am I managing my thoughts and expectations around other people and myself? Do I know my core values? So I know what
Mhm.
triggers me and sets me
Yeah.
off the
Yeah.
handle. And then, yeah, how am I managing some boundaries? If we're showing up every day feeling like we have to have these hardcore boundaries, like, that is unsustainable too.
Hmm.
So that is what that course is all about.
Fantastic. So, Michelle, you have very thoughtfully put all of these educational tools together. One thing that strikes me is when you and I first spoke to each other a couple months ago, you had shared a story about how you had gone mountain climbing and you realized when you were on that trek that this had a lot of parallels to the work that you do. Can you say more and how that might have influenced you?
Yes. Okay. So to be transparent, we were talking about hiking,
Oh,
not,
hiking.
yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. All right.
If
Leave it
you're
to me to turn a hike into a mountain climb. I
climb, well,
had
I
you
mean,
summiting a 14er. Yeah, right?
I did summit the 14er.
Okay.
I wasn't scaling the front of it
Okay.
in
Fair.
like
That's fair. Okay. Fair,
climbing
fair.
gear.
Got it.
Yes.
Got it. Got it. All right. Fair.
So one of the parallels that I really drew was the fact that we have so many false summits in our life. Life
Yeah.
is just this series of false summits. And this particular hike, Mount Elbert, is the tallest peak in Colorado.
Okay.
And it was a pretty brutal 14er.
Yeah.
And we got to the first false summit, and I really thought, I'm done. I'm just
Uh,
done. Like, I cannot go any further. I cannot do this. So I think false summits being the first parallel, just how
mm,
many times do we hit these
yeah.
plateaus and feel exhausted and done? The
Hmm.
second parallel was rest, the importance of rest. Once I caught my breath, had a sandwich, I closed my eyes for 30 minutes. Like once
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to do that, it really refueled me to go to that second fall summit. This was hilarious, Lynn, because I'm looking at that second fall summit and someone had said, well, this first one was the worst.
Mm,
So I'm looking at the second one and I thought, that does not look that bad.
I
So
can
maybe
do this.
I
Yeah.
can do this. So maybe a little false optimism helped me there.
I like it.
Um, and when I got to that second one, it really was, you were just sauntering over the hill a little bit further to get to the summit. So yeah, taking those moments to rest are just so critically
Hmm.
important. And it was interesting because I realized that I was tapping into something, I don't know if primal is the right word,
Hmm.
but the pushing that I was able to do of myself, it was this digging deep, but it was not from a place of exhaustion, it was from a place of motivation.
Yeah. I feel that just hearing your story. I feel that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that whether we're caregiving or managing our household and careers or, trying to get along with our neighbors and colleagues, whatever your Mount Albert is for you, to just draw your own parallels
I
of,
love
of
that.
what you feel like that would look like for you could be interesting.
I love that. That's a great story. Michelle, I feel like I should ask, you've given so much great advice, but just to kind of tie it up in a bow, for people out there that might be somewhere on that caregiving journey, what advice do you have for them?
It really is one step at a time. I
Mm,
think it is helpful to have that 30,000 foot view of, what could happen, and we are only living in this present moment. So ruminating about should've, could've, would've
mm,
is going to, I think, crush your soul, and it's going
mhm,
to make this so much harder. And
mhm.
worrying about the future and what may or may not happen, worrying is not planning.
Yeah.
So getting a little more information, fueling yourself up on those plateaus with whatever you need and to rest yourself and to be thoughtful about. I mean, if we have a disease process that is underway, we have some ideas about where things may lead.
Mhm.
But what I always share is whatever you think the best case scenario is or the worst case scenario is, we're probably going to land somewhere in the middle.
Absolutely. Good
Yeah.
point. Good point. So, Michelle, for people who want to tap into some of the resources, listen to the podcasts, dig into the coursework, where can they find the information?
I have a website,
Of course you
and
do.
the website is inspiredcaring.com. The podcast is also called Inspired Caring, and it is on all the major platforms.
Fantastic. We will have some links to those in the show notes as well. And I'm so happy for you that you were able to get in early enough that you got inspiredcaring.com and you didn't have to do any funky gyrations to stand out. So that's awesome. As a marketer, that's always something we look for. So
Well, and to be honest with you, I was speaking with this woman on the East Coast, and I was thinking about the name
yeah.
Inspired Caregiver, and or Inspired Caregiving,
Yes.
right? And we were having this conversation, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I think I have that URL." Because I had said, lamented, oh, it's taken.
And
The
it was
next day,
hers.
and the next day she texted me and she said, actually, what I have is Inspired Caring. And I would love to gift it to you.
Oh, that's amazing.
It is amazing. So we have a virtual handshake agreement that once I hit a certain point within the business, and I am going to mail her a check. I
That's
cannot wait to
awesome.
do that. Yeah.
That's awesome. I
So
I love that. Having been on the other side of that, it's just frustrating to be looking for a URL and knowing somebody's got it, but they're not using it and not being able to find them. Honestly, people ask me sometimes why KidGlov is spelled without an E. And it's the first reason is because KidGlov.com with an E was already taken by a transportation company in Indiana. I've probably sent so many people to their website, but then we also said, hey, it's kind of cool and funky to spell it our own way as well. So, all right, Michele, I want to switch gears here and I want to ask you my favorite question because everybody who listens knows I'm inspired by motivational quotes. And I know you've said so many good things here today. And I mean, you have the word inspired in your website and your podcast name. So I'd like a Michele Magner original quote to inspire our listeners.
One of my favorite quotes that I say all the time is, "We are all operating at the speed of information."
Mm.
We are all operating at the speed of information. And I think what that does is it gives us some grace for doing the best we can with the information that we have right in front of us. And it also allows us to be open to the idea that maybe there's more information that could be obtained to shift gears or take us in a different direction if that's what needs to happen for the person that we care about and for ourselves. So we're just all operating at the speed of information. And, to piggyback onto that, we're all just folks trying to get stuff done.
Yep. Yep. And we're all trying to do our best. Like that is a deep belief of mine. I believe that everybody is really trying to do their best with the information and the resources that they have. And, we don't know what's under the surface or what's, going on behind the curtains. But yeah, I really appreciate that. That's awesome.
We don't know what's over that first fall summit.
Yes, I
or
love
the
it.
second one. So we'll have more information.
Absolutely. Way to tie that all together. I love that. Michele, I have loved talking with you today. And to really wrap things up, I'd love to hear what is the most important thing you would like people to remember about the work that you're doing?
I think the most important thing to remember about the work that I am doing is that I am not the only one doing it.
Oh, yeah.
I think that we do a good job of finding a resource and exploring that. And then I also want to really encourage people that there are so many other people in this space that also have a lot of wisdom and knowledge to share. I personally would love to support you and work with you and also look around. I would encourage people to go ahead when you're doing a search, use that word caregiver, even if you don't identify as a caregiver. It's going to unlock this whole new world for you. And there's a lot of people on Instagram in this space. There's a lot of podcasts in this space. So I am not alone in this, and you are not alone in this.
That is such a good sentiment because sometimes I think it could probably feel like a very lonely journey. And what I hear you saying is it really doesn't have to be. That's great. Michele, I have really enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to say that I fully believe the world needs more people like you, more aging enthusiasts and caregiving coaches, and more tools and resources like you've developed at Inspired Caring. Thank you so much for sharing today.
Thanks for having me, Lynn. This was truly a delight.
We hope you enjoyed today's Agency for Change podcast. To hear all our interviews with those who are making a positive change in our communities, or to nominate a changemaker you'd love to hear from, visit KidGlov.com at KidGlov.com to get in touch. As always, if you like what you've heard today, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and share. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.